mankind lives within the comfortable confines of their understood reality. We call this the normal, a standard set by our day-to-day lives. The normal is different for every person, and for every person, their lives have a chance to become abnormal. Abnormal is the state of being away from your accepted reality. This is usually in ways that we don't find pleasurable. Think of those days where everything's going wrong. And then there's the next step, or something even removed from abnormality. We call that paranormal or paranormality. Many don't see this world, but it does exist. The paranormal is not only away from the normal, but set against it. So adverse as to what we understand our realities to be, that many people would describe these things as otherworldly, and most would agree they are not normal. Recently, I did 2 videos on a series called The Oldest View, done by creator Kane Pixels. One on my understanding of the story and the meaning of the series, and another on its effective use of horror and cinematic tropes. Today's video, and effectively my last video of the year, is a marathon style of video, combining both of these previous videos into a marathon style format. But that's not all that's going to be here. I am also going to add some additional commentary and coverage, especially considering some new things have been uploaded by Kane Pixels, as well as other YouTube channels around The Oldest View. The original videos are going to be entirely intact within this video, with my additional commentary coming now at the start, between the two, and at the end. I'll be using chapters so you can skip around to listen to the new stuff or watch the old videos to your liking. To start off, Kane has also released 2 additional videos about The Oldest View, one of them being a behind-the-scenes look on the creative aspects of The Oldest View, specifically the creation of the 3D models and movement and things like that, and another being a sort of dedication to the real-life Reverchon giant, with a little additional lore to dissect as well. I'll be talking about these new additional videos by Kane Pixels as well as some others, and be giving my own thoughts on my 2 videos that I made about The Oldest View. I'll also briefly talk about the Wendigoon video that he did on his second channel with Kane Pixels, to give some additional context because he said some things in there that I feel are important, as well as the FilmTheory video on The Oldest View and my thoughts on it as well. If you enjoyed the original videos, I do hope that you give this a watch and you enjoy it. I also made a Backrooms video as people requested that I enjoyed working on, and may also talk on here some too at the end. Also, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It helps a lot, especially since I'm being held hostage by a supernatural entity who will only release me if I get enough internet clout. I'm just kidding, it's never going to let me go, I'm cursed. But still, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, thanks. Also, of course, please check out Kane Pixels' channel. These videos are his original work, they're excellent, and I couldn't be talking about something so awesome if it didn't exist from the original creator. So please go watch The Oldest View and the Backroom series on Kane Pixels' channel. So, having said all that, let's descend the staircase back into The Oldest View. Human beings naturally fear that which they don't understand. The fear is oftentimes misguided, but sometimes it's more than justified. What horrors might lie beyond what we understand, beyond human perception, around dark corners where our views are narrowed by shadows, finding ourselves in places that we weren't meant to be, or maybe even places we were meant to be but dearly wished we weren't. And even scarier than that, under the right circumstances, the familiar can be far more frightening than the unknown. The Oldest View is a miniseries currently comprised of 3 parts by the creator Kane Pixels. We follow our protagonist, Wyatt, who has found a mysterious underground staircase that leads to a mall. Of course, this is a horror series, and things are not what they seem, or maybe, even worse, they are. In today's video, I'll explore the series and what I think it means. If you guys enjoyed the video, I'll also do another on the way Kane created horror in the series, as well as the technical aspects such as the sound and world design. I'd recommend watching the series yourself because it is very good, if a little bit slow to start. I'll also preface the fact that this is actually my first time watching any of Kane's content. I've never really been interested in the Backrooms, but this caught my interest. I was led to it by a video that probably inspired him to make it. This video featuring the actual abandoned mall and the giant, which is now filled with comments from people coming from Kane's video. Anyway, let's explore the creeping, familiar horror of the oldest view.
Parting, oh parting is grief and pain.
Episode 1 is short and simple. Titled Renewal, we see a man wearing an older style of clothing exploring a forest, looking at the plants and foliage, and eventually sitting down to read. Then, after this, we see the creation of a cardboard face, as a distorted version of the song When the Swallows Homeward Fly, sung by Thompsons, plays. For now, we're going to leave this as it is, but we will come back to it. Keep everything in mind here, as it's all important. The second episode, titled Beneath the Earth, starts off interestingly. We see a sepia-toned sky, with what sounds like creaking, rolling wheels approaching. Then, we cut to a rather upbeat vlog by a young man named Wyatt, who has found a hole with a really, really long staircase in it in the middle of a park. He says it's on private property, so we don't really know where it is. Wyatt, of course, decides to descend the long staircase. As he's going down, he says that it smells of cut grass, and ominously says to himself that,
The further I go, I'm starting to realize that this is a really stupid idea. But hey, natural selection, right?
"Oh, Wyatt, if only you knew." After descending the nearly mile-long staircase, Wyatt finds himself at a wall and door. Both the door and wall are incredibly aged, almost disturbingly so. The room behind the door is also just as disturbingly decrepit as the door itself, with a rusty grate that leads into another area. This whole room just reeks of, "Don't come here."
I'm not supposed to be here.
But Wyatt decides to crawl under the grate and see what's behind it anyway. And what does he find? Well,
I'm not supposed to be here.
a mall. Yes, he's in a storefront in a mall with one of those gates behind it, and he can hear music playing, and this is where the video ends. Viewers at this point had to wait a few months before Part 3 came out. Part 3 is called The Rolling Giant. I wonder why. This one begins rather terrifyingly in comparison to any of the other parts. Before cutting back to Wyatt again, rather joyously vlogging as he's going about his day, talking about how he left up trail cameras and no one showed up, and also the fact that a light in the tunnel down went out. But there isn't much important information here besides that. Oh, is that a red flower next to the tree there? I wonder what that's all about. On the way down, Wyatt again mentions the smell of cut grass.
It smells like cut grass smell that I mentioned. It's like a cornfield kind of smell.
Again, we see the same creepy room that he entered in previously. Wyatt, of course, enters the room and goes out of his way to crawl underneath the grate that allows him to enter the mall. Wyatt takes his time to open one of the metal shutters, which clangs loudly and causes him to rush back, scaring him. I'd say this is the last point he can turn back, but he doesn't. He decides to go back in and explore.
This is literally like the backrooms from TikTok.
Backrooms mention. Wyatt points out that there is an AMC.
It's a fucking AMC.
Which, yeah, it's odd. I mean, this whole underground mall is odd, and honestly, you should probably get out of there. Wyatt, like us, is disturbed when he first finds the rolling giant. He says that he doesn't like it, and right after that, the lights come on.
I don't like this thing. Oh, fuck.
I felt like this could possibly be connected, but who knows. This is when Wyatt decides that he needs to nope the fuck out of there. He does his best to stealthily scramble back to where he got in, only to find that it is crumbled in on itself, and that he is sadly trapped.
We're out.
Man, you should have left earlier, honestly. After this horrific discovery, Wyatt is forced to continue exploring, looking for a way out or some hope. He happens upon a poster of... Wait a minute. That guy looks kind of familiar. Wyatt finds that all of the ways out of the mall are, well, they're not exits, it's just stone walls. When Wyatt first ran into the rolling giant, he also noticed the octopus on the wall, which we're seeing again.
Yeah, it's an octopus. Big painting.
I'm sure you all noticed that something is missing, though. I wonder what that could be. It seems Wyatt realizes it's gone too. And then thunder is heard, and the lights begin to go out, and oh god, it's over there. It wasn't over there before, but it is now. I don't like that. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps. Oh, and it's gone. It's gone again. Man, that boy is schmoovin'. This is when things really begin to fall apart, in more ways than one, like literally as well. This is also the first time that Wyatt and me as a viewer notices that one of the art studios is now, well, overgrown with fauna and forest life. Then he hears a distant squeaking or creaking of what could possibly be, maybe wheels? And then... oh, fuck. Oh, God. There it is. It's right there, and it wasn't there before, and that is fucking scary. Wyatt, of course, tells the hulking, rolling statue that he's just trying to leave, but man, I'm sorry to say, I don't think that matters at this point.
I'm leaving. I'm trying to leave.
It begins toying with him, and eventually Wyatt catches on that this thing does not play by the rules.
Hey!
It's kind of a bad boy, if you will. Wyatt takes off running, but the thing gives chase, and he eventually ends up in the back rooms of the mall. But he can still hear it wheeling around and even beginning to break down the windows of the place that he's hidden. After narrowly escaping the wheeled fiend, Wyatt runs about and finds himself in the mall's offices. Wyatt gathers some information on a possible way out after combing through some documents and continues on, though there is more to this scene than meets the eye. More on that later, of course. Wyatt then leaves the office, and as he's about to re-enter the main area of the mall, he sees a poster to the left of the door, and hears life behind the door. Music, people walking and laughing. As if it's just a normal mall now. This, of course, is an illusion. As he steps out, the mall has deteriorated drastically. The sound of birds can be heard and other things, we don't really know what. As well as what sounds like music from a funeral and someone giving a sermon in the background. As he tries to escape, the giant surprises him. He makes his way upstairs, begins to climb, only to find that the giant can actually go up the escalator. Oh dear God, what a skillful guy. After asking what it wants, the giant uses what seems to be psychic powers to flash images of dead men and horses to him, which of course frightens the hell out of him, and then afterwards the giant charges him. Wyatt manages to escape the giant, but not the mall itself. And then, we see the surface. Wyatt, having fallen to his death, now mysteriously lies in the grass of the forest floor, face pointed at the head of the giant. Both Wyatt and the giant are now devoid of color, both black and white set against the greenery around them, bright and vibrant. So now that we've set the stage, let's discuss. There's been a lot of discussion online in comments and forums about what this whole series means, what the story is. There's a lot of hints throughout, but I think that there will always be some mystery left for us to discuss. From Kane saying in his Discord that we are living in part 4 to what the giant really wanted from Wyatt. So we'll start from the beginning. The man we see in the forest in part 1 is an actor who I believe is playing Julien Revachon. Julien Revachon was a French botanist who moved close to a settlement called La Réunion in what would later become Dallas, Texas. If you don't know what botany is, it's basically the study of plants and fauna in nature. Now, why Julien is black and white while everything else is so vibrantly colorful around him? Well, I believe it's because, in our modern time, he's very much dead. The reason part 1 is called Renewal is because Julien is dead, but the piece of art that represents Julien, made by artist Kevin Auberjohn, is in a sense renewing him and giving him new life. Art can give life to dead things, dead thoughts, dead feelings. He is, in essence, bringing Julien back, though in a different form. It isn't Julien, but in essence it is. It is a representation of him and his ideas, his memory unforgotten. I think this is all brought together by the song that plays during this moment, when the swallows homeward fly, performed by Alan Thompson on YouTube. There are actually many different versions of this song with varying lyrics, but all of those different versions, including the one in the video, explore similar themes. The song sings of grieving the passing of time, the pain of loss, represented by the passing of the seasons into a dark winter. The end of the song sings of the passing of grief, when one can once again feel joy. Considering the name of the video and what I think it means, I think my interpretation is pretty close. The beginning of the song representing the death of Julien Revachon, and the ending of the song representing his renewal, the idea of art giving him life. Not to mention the heavy use of nature in the song to represent these ideas, as both the song and The Oldest View as a series focus on life and death and the ever-presence of nature itself while other things fade away. But of course, these are all my theories, and I'd love to hear your own in the comments down below. This moves us into part 2. This is mostly build-up, showing what would come for the viewers later, to build tension and apprehension, but there are still some pretty important tidbits here. At the start, we hear the creaky movement of what sounds like wheels, foreshadowing our large and terrifying friend that we and Wyatt meet in part 3. As Wyatt travels down the mile-long staircase, I find him pointing out the smell of cut grass as a sort of sign.
I'm smelling like cut grass. Like when you mow the lawn. It's smelling good after. That's the chlorophyll, right?
As this is a smell of stress from plants that are being cut or endangered in some way. Wyatt also saying, "I shouldn't be here," is also pertinent. I don't think he should be there either. I think he's going into a place where someone living does not belong. But of course, Wyatt is a YouTuber, so that sweet clout calls to him. This video did go viral, so maybe it was worth it, but probably not considering what we know. The main thing that I want to focus on in part 2 are the stairs and this little area at the bottom of them. These stairs, as well as this room, gave me strong Silent Hill vibes, and I wasn't the only one. I think if we're speaking purely symbolically here, these stairs are in a sense the transition into another world, symbolically and literally in this case, as Wyatt has to walk down them to get to the mall below. And this terrifying rotting room is like passing through a barrier or portal. I also think it's a warning. Wyatt has to go into this room and purposefully crawl through a rusty, deteriorating gate to get to the mall. I think this is a warning of what is to come. This is a warning of deterioration. This is a warning of death. These things are at odds with almost everything else here. The pristine nature of the mall itself, and even the aged stairs, which, sure, they aren't in the best condition, but they look nothing like this nasty, deteriorating, scary-looking room. Why is this one room so deteriorated, so rusted, so dilapidated? I think it's to show that you shouldn't be here, that this is what is to come, that this is what this really is. This is a place that life does not belong. There is, of course, music playing when he enters the mall. Whether this is important or not, I don't know at this point. Maybe it's just to tantalize him, but music and sound design is very important with this series, as we see in part 1 and also part 3. And, speaking of part 3, of course, this is where everything comes together. There's a lot to cover, but I'll try to keep it nice and tight. A lot of people have pointed out that the giant has red flags on its back, and we also see red flags within the mall office that Wyatt goes into, as well as what looks to be something red next to the tree at the beginning of part 3. I don't think it is a red flag. I think it's a red flower, and I honestly don't know if it means anything greatly important to the overall story. But red flags do pop up a few times throughout the videos, and red flags typically do mean danger or a warning of some sort, but I'm not so sure. Once in the mall, Wyatt begins exploring. He of course notices the giant in the dark, as well as the fact that it did move. This is just the start of the giant's game. Horror has rules, and this guy likes to break them. Wyatt seems to think it works on Weeping Angel logic at first, aka if you're not looking at it, it's not going to move, but of course we know it doesn't. Almost seems like it's playing a game with him, like it or the mall is playing a game with him as we get further into it, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. The lights come on, of course, after he says that he dislikes it, which I don't know if they're connected, but it does seem like perfect timing. You say you dislike this thing, which is a living entity of some sort, and then the lights come on and scare the shit out of you.
I don't like this thing. Oh, fuck.
I think this is the point where he kind of transitions into the actual otherworldly nature of this place. As the lights come on, the mall takes on life, and the exit that he went in through, the portal, as I said earlier, is now closed. He is here. There is no getting out. I do think it's interesting that the room, the dilapidated room, is still there. It's just the stairs that are gone. This is followed by him finding one of the art studios that is now filled with plant life, rocks, soil, and forestry, as if it's being overtaken by the forest above. This is just another sign of what is to come. After his first real encounter with the giant up close, Wyatt ends up in what looks to be a corporate office after a chase. The first thing Wyatt sees in this office are some type of plans for what looks to be a park or some type of complex to replace the mall that we are seeing. If you didn't know, this whole place is based off of what was once a real-world location called the Valley View Mall, which was recently demolished in 2023. The plans in question show that they're going to replace it with some type of park, forestry, maybe even some type of complex. In real life, where the Valley View Mall once was, there seemed to be plans to turn the area into a city within a city, featuring parks, shopping, homes, etc. How trendy. Wyatt also pores over a document that has reference numbers for further documents. These numbers may seem trivial at first, but for the overall plot point of the series, they're actually quite important. The first number is 1855-1857. When translated into the standard year-to-year history format, that would be 1855 to 1857. These 2 years were the time span of the short-lived La Reunion socialist colony in Texas that Julian Reverchon went to when he came to America. The next set of numbers is 1973-2023. This should be pretty obvious, but it's 1973 to 2023. This was the opening year of the Valley View Mall, followed by the current year, which is when it was demolished after having been closed for a number of years and falling into decay and disrepair and even a fire. And last but not least is 1837-1905, the birth and death years of Julian Reverchon. After finding a map which just luckily marks where one of the exits to the mall is, how convenient, Wyatt goes to leave. He tries to rationalize everything he's seen, that it's all a mistake. It might be a mistake that he's there, but it might not. What I do know is that the statue definitely isn't a security system like he thinks, but that isn't really important. What is this. This poster and what Wyatt hears behind the door when he approaches it. Behind the door we hear what sounds like the mall when it was flourishing. People talking, music, laughing, walking, shopping. Or maybe just what could be people filing in for a funeral. The poster to the left says plainly, "Do you accept this impermanence?" And as Wyatt steps through the door, the sound of people fades away. The mall is a dilapidated wreck of its former self, much to Wyatt's dismay. The sounds of people are gone, and all that's left is what sounds like a piano or organ playing, music that would be fitting for a funeral. We then begin to hear someone speaking, almost in the tone of a preacher, giving a sermon, or more than likely a eulogy. For the mall? For Wyatt? I guess we'll find out. Wyatt despondently runs through and is surprised by the giant who has been waiting for him. We see a flash of the other giants from the parade as Wyatt runs up the escalator. This is where our final confrontation with the giant happens. This scene has a lot going on, and I'm going to try to break it down as best I can. The giant comes up the escalator, which is something we didn't know that he could do before. Behind him, a wall panel falls, revealing an opening into darkness. Wyatt asks the giant what it wants, and it seems to flash a vision of, well, plainly death to him. Whose death? Is that important? I don't know. People are lying face down along with dead horses for only a moment, and then it disappears, and the giant storms towards Wyatt, or rolls towards him aggressively. The giant crashes into where Wyatt once was, and it begins to cause them all to crumble even faster. And as Wyatt does his best to scurry along towards the exit, he looks back and sees that those dead things that were flashed to him are now there, a permanent fixture in the mall. The giant rolls away and disappears, leaving only its stand, and as Wyatt tries to crawl out through this oddly placed exit, the pillar that he is using to stand on falls from underneath him and, well, leads to his death. In the final scene, as I said in the story above, Wyatt is black and white. He is black and white because he is dead from the fall that he suffered. Across from him, the head of the giant, also black and white as well, is staring lifelessly back at him. So, what is the oldest view about? What does the title mean? To me it seems pretty simple, but I could be wrong, of course. My theory is that the oldest view is about death. It's about time. It's about the inevitable march and the fact that things fade away, people die, places crumble. There's so much allusion to it throughout this series. The idea of birth and renewal, of this creation of art, of the giant bringing life through art, bringing the memory of Julian Revachon back to life. Wyatt's death, the color drained from him, as well as it was Julian, who had long since passed, even though what we saw of him was a living representation through acting. The giant, as well, seemingly loses its life. There are, of course, supernatural elements. Why was the mall there? Why did it change so quickly? That's harder to understand. It is horror, of course. Some things we aren't meant to understand. That's where fear comes from. It could also all just be representations of life and decay. It's hard for me to tell the giant's motivations as a monster. Did it actually want to help Wyatt? When it comes up the escalator and the wall panel behind it falls, a part of me wanted to think that it was trying to show him a way out. Or maybe this is a representation of just more decay around it. It's certainly hard to feel like it has good intentions considering the way it stalked him through the whole mall so calculatedly. Almost like a cat playing with a mouse that it actually plans to kill. But in the end, it isn't the giant that kills Wyatt, even though it might have had the ability to do so with how hard it crashed into that wall there. It's the mall, or really his own attempt to escape it, to escape decay, to escape time, to escape death. The mall itself was a real place. The Valley View Mall in Texas, as I mentioned, which was demolished earlier this year. This is a shade of a real place, deep underground, most definitely not a natural occurrence. It seems Wyatt was unfortunate enough to happen upon some warp in reality, some type of time capsule of decay. If Wyatt hadn't come to find it, would the mall have just stayed there, forever frozen in a form of stasis, if not for a human to come and find it, and view it, and give it life? It is humanity, after all, that makes places like malls a place that is alive. A building is just a building, an empty place, with no one there to enjoy it. This plays back to the color contrast we see, the bright green living forest against the long-deceased Julian and the recently deceased Wyatt. Nature exists without us. The mall decays and returns to nature without us. It takes on a different life in its death. What Wyatt seemed to have experienced was an expedient timeline of the life and death of this mall, from its opening all the way until its final days, as it was overtaken by time. The statue of Julian, though, is now black and white as well at the end. Why is that? Well, art without someone to appreciate it is nothing, really. It's an expression without someone to enjoy it. Everyone knows that piece of modern art that's just a banana taped to a wall, but that means nothing if it was always like that or there was no one around to see it. It would just be a banana taped to a wall, a symbol representing nothing. But a person taped it there, which gave it meaning, it gave it intent. Kevin Obrejean created the giant. He gave it life as a symbol to represent the life of Julian Reverchon, as a representation of who Julian Reverchon was, in celebration of him, the ideas that he had, the thoughts and feelings, the person that he was. Now that Wyatt is gone, no longer able to see the giant alive as it was in the mall, it no longer has any meaning. Of course, this is all theorization. These are all just my thoughts. I could be completely wrong, but who knows? Kevin said that we're living in part 4. I don't know whether that means that there will be an actual part 4 or not, but it makes sense. If the oldest view is death, if the oldest view is time, and the inevitable march of everything to dust, every day we do live it. We live in a world now that exists after the video came out. It has been changed by it. And, like the giant, like Julian, it is an event in history that will one day fade and pass along just as all of us will. It's as beautiful as it is sad. That art, it really is just like a spooky alternate dimension mall full of a monster statue. Like, what was up with that screaming at the beginning of part 3? That's one of the few things that sits with me the most, the things that I find hard to explain even for myself. There is so much depth to this, so much that it could mean. This is all just my theories, of course, my theories and thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed exploring this series with me. I really do think that a lot of this is just a representation of time and the inevitable march of death, everything that we will be and won't be. That is the oldest view. It is the thing that, as humans, we have experienced since the beginning of time, existence and the lack thereof. To get more into the theorization of the actual story of it, what Wyatt probably happened upon was, like the Backrooms in a sense, a break in reality, a place that is gone and should not be perfectly recreated anywhere else, but it was there. It was there and Wyatt saw it. It went from being a pristine mall to a decayed husk of its former self, complete with a funeral procession of giants to see it out, and sadly, one last victim. I say victim because, well, not necessarily that the mall was trying to kill Wyatt, but Wyatt was trying to escape something that is inevitable, decay, loss, something that at some point we're all going to have to deal with. Now, of course, there could be more to it, and I actually do look forward to seeing more videos on this series, and more videos by Kane, and just more. This was so good. I had so much fun with this, and it's why I wanted to make a video on it. Besides the fact that it's spooky season, The Oldest View is such a well-crafted piece of horror that has symbolism, it has tension, it has world building and sound, and I am very interested to see more of what he's going to make in the future. If more of it is like this, then count me in on it. I am so excited to be scared by Kane Pixels. Anyway, I'm GhostsOnHoliday. Again, I hope you enjoyed exploring this with me. I hope you liked the video. And remember,
you know, pumpkins are actually flying out of your ass.
That was, of course, my first video on The Oldest View, and originally I was going to use this little space here to talk about how I felt about it, but I still feel pretty strongly about it and the conclusions that I came to. I still like the video a lot, so instead I'm going to use this brief intermission to talk about the film theory video on The Oldest View. Of course, MatPat and his team come to a lot of the same conclusions as I do in my own video. Of course, Wyatt is a YouTuber, so that sweet clout calls to him.
To enter this obviously dangerous, mysterious stairwell, all in pursuit of that sweet, sweet content.
Because a lot of the breadcrumbs are there for people to look for and find. I do think his conclusion that The Oldest View is about nostalgia is pretty interesting and not incorrect. I, of course, still like my own conclusion and feel like it fits the heaviness of what The Oldest View expresses and the horror of it more. I definitely think nostalgia and themes of passing time are very key to The Oldest View, and things that are definitely expressed within it, especially considering Kane talks about this in his own interviews with people like Wendigoon and De Solar.
Initially, in the first 24 or 48 hours, I believe most of these are authentic, of people accounting or sharing accounts of like seeing the giant when they were younger in the mall, like Dallas locals and whatnot. And even for people who didn't necessarily see the giant, just people who went to that mall every week. Some people who even worked there. I know one person who had the studio across from Kevin O'Bregan's studio is active on Reddit, and they've seen this, and it's they've been reposting stuff about it, and it's just so cool to see how it's reaching back to all of these real people who interacted with this real place at this time. And sort of a lot of the intention was kind of, I had those people in mind.
Yeah,
like
me too.
they had, like, being one of those people and just clicking on this video, having no expectation for it, and then realizing that this was their mall. Most of you can probably sort of get a sense, even if you have never been to the Valley View Mall in your life. I have a feeling it resonates. There's a lot to be picked apart in this particular video, especially for locals of Dallas. I sort of made the video with them in mind in some ways.
Kane mentions getting this really specific feeling when seeing the original image of the giant and wanting to search it out with some people he was close with.
There's this one image that I found a couple years back. I think it was like summer 2021. Let me get it for you. This image like freaked me out so much, or at least like punched me in the gut really hard when I first saw it. I just saved it on my computer. It was like compelling. This was way before Backrooms. It just sort of stayed on my hard drive. I didn't really think about it. And then just right before, I think it was like literally on New Year's Eve, I sort of came back into contact with this image and decided to like started getting really fascinated by it again. And so I started reverse image searching it, figured out where it came from, and then started going down the rabbit hole. I found some other images of it online, some very limited ones, because it's absurdly obscure. Maybe there's more content for it available now than there was at the time, but at the time you couldn't look up Rolling Giant and really get anything. The only way I was really able to find images was by looking up image tags for Valley View Mall, like people tagging their photos from like 2012 on Instagram. This statue was created by a Dallas artist, Kevin O'Bregan, who I have since all this has happened, like I'm in communication with him. I was talking to him earlier today. In the beginning here, it was, I can't even explain how surreal this was. I and a couple others in a small little Discord group chat, like we would just spend hours and hours, like over our winter break, just scouring the internet for like any and all traces of this guy. And slowly we built up a library of like around 40 images. I think we sit at around like 50 today.
I thought that he'd said explicitly that he made the oldest view with the intent of giving others that feeling.
Kane said on Discord, "That's exactly how I feel about this project. There's all sorts of hidden meanings and themes, but really the initial spawning point of this project was just me wanting to replicate the feeling I got while researching the giant for the first time." Yeah.
I believe some of that feeling is nostalgia, but I also believe that that feeling is at least partially anemoia. If you've never heard this word before, don't feel bad, as I've only learned about it recently myself. Anemoia is basically nostalgia for something that you've never experienced. I think we've all gotten that strange nostalgic feeling for something and realized, oh, I've never actually seen or been there before, and that strange dissonance you feel that follows when you have that realization. Of course, as I mentioned in the second video, which is coming up, and Kane Pixels himself says in his talks with Wendigoon and De Solar, the video was also made for people who did live in Dallas and have direct nostalgia connected to the mall and the giant itself. But, as most know, Kane has never really been to the mall or seen the giant in person, and I'd say most of the viewers of The Oldest View haven't either. But a lot of us have been to a mall before, and I'd say that the mall and the giant probably gave a lot of people that creeping sense of anemoia. We have all seen something like the giant that just gave us this odd, creepy feeling, and getting it reignited by the giant again, I could say is, at least in part, anemoia. Anyway, on to my second Oldest View analysis video on the horror of The Oldest View. Afterwards, we're going to talk about Life of a Giant, the other video that Kane uploaded, as well as his behind-the-scenes video on his second channel, and that'll probably conclude the extra content that we have for The Oldest View until Kane makes something new in the future. In my previous video on The Oldest View, I talked about the plot and the possible meaning behind the elements introduced, but I also touched on a few of the things that made it scary. One of the first things I mentioned was the fear of the unknown. It's one of the most basic fears that people have. At a young age, people are scared of the dark, but find it hard to rationalize why. In reality, most people aren't scared of the dark itself, but the fact that they can't see. What might be hiding in that darkness? What might be lurking, waiting to show itself? In this video, I want to discuss how Kane Pixels use different unspoken ideas in the horror genre and filmmaking to create scares without so much as a single jump scare. Unless you count this, but I don't really count this, so this is more of an aggressive roll scare. This video is technically a part 2, the first part being this video here. Check it out, as I am going to talk about things assuming you've either seen The Oldest View or my first video. Anyway, it's time to try and understand how The Oldest View scares you. I'm going to start the real body of this video off with a premise. The idea that effective horror uses certain rules and ideas. Horror doesn't always have to follow these rules and ideas to be effective, but a lot of the best horror movies, games, and stories do follow them to some degree. The Oldest View does adhere to these ideas to scare you, though of course, just as a video game is different than a horror movie, a 3-part YouTube series with each part varying in length will also be different. During Part 1, Renewal, and the opening seconds of Part 2, as well as the end of Part 3, we are viewing from what is known as the third-person point of view. In film, the third-person point of view is a camera that isn't being held by a character within the story. Instead, we're able to see a vision into a different world that is unaware that we as the viewers are there. Most narrative films use the third-person perspective. This is to relay information to us that is important to us as the audience, but not necessarily the characters within the story. This shifts, of course, as we begin to follow the hero of The Oldest View, Wyatt. I use hero in the storytelling sense, as Wyatt is basically our protagonist. At the start of Part 2, we see in the third-person perspective again, before a video buffer wheel appears to show the shift from third-person to the first-person view of Wyatt's vlogging camera. This shift in perspective is one of the first things done to subtly imbue a sense of unease in us as viewers, because it causes you to wonder what the previous information shown means within the context of story and for our hero. Why did we see that man in black and white in that forest, and what was that sculpture being made? What was the opening of Part 2 about with the sound of rolling wheels? And what does it all mean for our friend Wyatt, haplessly vlogging his inevitable doom? A lot of films stick to the third-person perspective, only showing us different situations with different characters. Another example of this shift in perspective from first to third person is actually very literal, albeit twisted around from the current subject. Halloween, which is one of my favorite movies, starts with the first-person perspective through the eyes of Michael Myers, only to switch to third to reveal that he is a child. Shocking to be sure, but also effective. Continuing to use Halloween as an example, I want to talk about the horror of contrasts. This idea can be explained through the idea of the normal versus the abnormal within horror. In a lot of horror films, games, and books, one thing that's done to unsettle us is to present our ideal, normal world, which is then taken away from us and the protagonists and replaced with the abnormal world of the horror story. Again, in Halloween, the abnormal is shown first, but then contrasted with the idyllic life of the teenager Laurie Strode. Having established that this is a horror story in the opening act of Halloween, we already understand that this idyllic life won't stay that way for long. We as the audience are informed that things aren't right through sounds and visuals. The unsettling theme music playing as Michael stalks Laurie Strode and her friends, the camera showing him as the main characters are blissfully unaware of the danger that he poses. This is done subtly in The Oldest View as well. The contrast of colors in the initial scenes with Julian Revachon in black and white and the forest in a vibrant green, but also the switch from this to the creation of the giant. We go from this serene forest scene to this off-putting, distorted song and oddly personal angles of the creation of the giant that are also fuzzy and distorted, then a rising note as the camera pulls away and directly puts us into Part 2. The horror of contrast continues in Part 2, with that perspective shift mentioned before. As stated, we go from third-person perspective to first, following our protagonist Wyatt along, leaving us wondering what the information from Part 1 meant. Establishing our normal world, we have Wyatt vlogging, all set to some rather chill and upbeat music. This upbeat mood, of course, shifts and dies away as he approaches the hole that leads to an incredibly long underground staircase. This is the beginning of our descent into the abnormal. One thing you'll notice already is the complete change in soundscape. We slowly fade out of the upbeat vlogging music.
This is the spot.
To nearly complete silence, only hearing Wyatt's voice, movements, and the loud electric buzz of the lights around him as he descends the staircase. While not outright terrifying by any stretch of the imagination, the shift from the bubbly opening with the upbeat bouncy music to the quiet, only filled by the ambient noise and our protagonist speaking, shifts us into an apprehensive state. These unsettling feelings pick up even more as a new ambient music track is introduced at the turn of the stairs.
I'm not even sure what to say.
As I pointed out in my previous video, which you should watch if you want more of the theorization side of all this, Wyatt ominously points out the stupidness of what he's doing. This shows us, the audience, that he's aware of the danger he's putting himself in a way making him seem brave as he isn't thoughtlessly wandering into what he's doing. Which is good. We want to think that our protagonist is not a total idiot. Then he encounters the door at the bottom. The music takes another horrifying turn here, and this is the first time I'm going to bring up the idea of escalation in horror. Escalation can be many things, and I'll talk about it later on in this video, but here, there's a very subtle escalation of mood through sound and visuals. As Wyatt approaches the door, the music goes from these silent, airy synth notes to a more ominous, guttural drone, full of these random deep horns with chanting in the background as well, just a cacophony of unease, meant to match what Wyatt and us as the viewers are feeling in this moment.
Go off to the right. Dude, I'm fucking shaking.
This isn't abated as he enters the room, which somehow looks even older than the stairs. This sets our expectations up. What is this little room? Why is the music so scary as he approaches it? Then, this is immediately met with something even more confusing. As Wyatt peers through the grate in that room, we see a mall. This is a subversion of our expectations completely. How does this even match what we've seen to this point? The music again changes as we hear the humble guitar riffs in the distance of mall ambience. The kind of thing, of course, that you'd hear in a food court while waiting for a slice of mall pizza. With that little room, the mile-long staircase, the horns, all together, this makes us feel like this is a bad place to be. Wyatt laughs at the absurdity of the situation, and just as with part 1, we end with him looking in on the mall as an ominous note rises and leads us directly into part 3. Now, before we really get into the meat of part 3, which is when all this tension building up pays off, let's look back and sum up what we've discussed so far. Wyatt is a cheery, upbeat vlogger who has stumbled across the unknown. Between parts 1 and 2, we had a change from the third-person perspective to the first-person found footage style. I think this switch of perspective is interesting because it tells us as an audience that there is a bigger picture, while simultaneously inviting us into the journey of Wyatt as he vlogs about this and humanizes it. In a movie like The Blair Witch Project, which is the granddaddy of found footage movies in the modern era, this first-person perspective was used to humanize our protagonists. We aren't just watching people from an unseen eye, we were experiencing their journey with them through their camera. 3 unsuspecting people who enter a terrifying situation that they aren't prepared for. But, in The Oldest View, we get both third and first-person perspectives. This creates dramatic irony. We as the audience know something more is going on, and our hero who is recording does not. And even we don't really know what we are seeing, that is until part 3. There's also the changes in sound, from the upbeat music to the dramatic horns and drones as Wyatt approaches the underground mall, but also the pure contrast of locations. Wyatt finds this place, deep underground, above a seemingly untouched and normal forest. 2 very contrasting places. One obviously does not belong. And now that we've said all of that, this brings us into part 3. Again, another third-person perspective shot of the forest, this time with the distant screams over the forest ambience. I don't need to say why this is unsettling, it just is. We then have the loading video transition to show us that we've moved from this outer third-person perspective to Wyatt's first-person vlogging perspective again. And again, he's upbeat, happy, he put up trail cameras to keep watch, which was a good idea, and of course he saw nothing. Again, this shows Wyatt isn't just a brain-dead horror protagonist. Of course, he does still go down into the mall by himself, which one could say is stupid or dangerous. And that's true. A lot of horror has our main character do things that we wouldn't do. These things can be seen as either stupid or brave, and sometimes both. As a horror protagonist, Wyatt does take some precautions, but you could argue not enough, and this commenter did point that out. Of course, I think the biggest thing is he didn't expect what happens in this underground mall, but that plays back into the normal versus the abnormal. As Wyatt approaches this hole, we experience the normal. Wyatt descends the long staircase while explaining how big whatever he found really is. Again, all we hear is him, the buzzing lights, and the sound of his footsteps.
The scale of this thing, but I did a deep dive online after I got back last time. And
as he gets deeper, the ambience once again kicks in, just like in part 2.
Area, just to see if I could find any other equipment, just traces of people, really at all. Didn't see anything. There was no tire tracks.
Showing us that he is descending into something, well, unsettling and wrong.
It's like a cornfield kind of smell. Okay, I'm gonna shut up.
The music cuts entirely this time as he enters, and instead we hear the creak of the door in the ominous womb of a large area. And no mall music this time. Also, in my previous video, some people pointed out that the gate to the mall didn't have a latch on it in part 2, but it does in part 3. While this video isn't about story theorization, I do think this is a really interesting detail that I first missed. The idea that the mall itself kept him out in part 2, but tantalizes him in part 3 has both lore and horror implications. It makes the mall seem like a monster luring its prey in. This gate, of course, crashes and makes a loud noise, and this is one of those moments where Wyatt could turn around and leave, but he doesn't. For the story to continue, for us, the audience, to peep the horror, so to speak, Wyatt has to enter the mall. He has to continue putting his curiosity above his better sense. In my first video, because of the focus on theory, I didn't get to talk about this. The visuals in this series are incredibly impressive. As far as I understand, this is all rendered in CG, and if you look closely at certain details, especially in the mall, it is noticeable. But the sheer scale of this and the cinematography and everything around it is so excellent that it's very easy to forgive some of the more off-looking elements. This isn't a $1 million studio making this. This is a YouTuber, Kane Pixels, and probably a small team of people all working on it together. And considering that, and the fact that the turnover from parts 1 and 2 and 3 were only months, that makes this incredibly amazing. It's seriously great stuff. Not only are the models really good looking, but the use of lighting to help hide some of it, especially at the start when the mall in darkness, it gives us a feeling of the unknown. Anything could be hiding in this darkness. The ambient track that's playing while Wyatt is exploring the darkened mall is incredibly off-putting. It's just got this constant synth note with what sounds like random, really low-tone, bassy heartbeats. That really just puts you on edge. It almost makes you think we're listening to Wyatt's heartbeat. The next few minutes are mostly Wyatt walking around in darkness, followed by the first sign of the giant. This doesn't really mean anything to us, but eagle-eyed viewers of the first part, and just people who looked at the thumbnail too, probably know what's coming up next. This is when Wyatt first runs into the giant. This tall, imposing sculpture that inevitably becomes the monster of this story. We as the audience already know that something is up with this, like Laurie Strode seeing Michael Myers early in Halloween, but not seeing the danger that he poses. But us as the audience know the danger he poses. We as the audience know something is wrong and that this giant is probably bad. From the thumbnail, from part 1, the general fact that this is a horror video made on a horror channel, but Wyatt doesn't. Again, dramatic irony. And just as soon as he says that he doesn't like this thing, the lights come on. There's obviously an implication here that these two things are connected.
I don't like this thing. Oh, fuck.
He says that, the lights come on, the music comes on as well. The mall is now alive. In any other setting, this would be kind of relaxing. But all things considered, this music and these lights are terrifying to us as an audience and also Wyatt. Because we don't know why this is happening. Is someone here?
I think I just saw something.
And then another escalation. Wyatt tries to leave but finds that he is trapped, which makes this situation even more dire. The exit is collapsed, and as Wyatt sits amongst the rubble, he admits that he's fucked up. And in that, we feel just as helpless as he does as viewers. Now that we're all firmly trapped in the mall together, let's talk about the horror of the mundane. The horror of the mundane is kind of hard to describe, but considering what I'm about to apply it to, I think you'll get the idea. Basically, normal things but with an undercurrent of horror. An empty mall by itself is creepy, sure, but it isn't scary. In fact, if you didn't have the part of Wyatt walking down a mile-plus long staircase, it would look like any other urban exploration video. But of course that isn't the case. This seemingly mundane place is anything but, because of the circumstances surrounding it. This is where things get a little existential, because the horror of the mundane in this case might actually apply less to Wyatt and more to certain people within the audience. There were a lot of comments on my video, as well as the actual videos of The Oldest View, talking about people who found it really strange to see the mall they grew up with in that video. Wyatt's confusion is warranted and establishes that he's probably never been to the Valley View Center Mall in Texas before it was demolished. But some of the people in the audience have been there and have seen the actual giant in person, and I imagine to them that can create a general sense of strangeness and unease. Back to Wyatt, who has begun walking around the mall. He spots this photo, which looks a lot like the man from part 1, and Wyatt finds, well, every exit is blocked, Silent Hill style, just giant walls blocking the ways out. I don't really need to say this again, but I will. Not normal. As Wyatt continues to walk around, I'd like to point out that throughout his wandering, he is constantly jerking the camera around, making panicked noises, and this is obviously going to have an effect on us as the viewer. His frightened state affects us. It puts us on edge as well. When he swings the camera, we expect that something might be there. But we don't see something, which builds up suspense until we do see something. This can either relieve tension or make it worse. This is only compounded when we and Wyatt as the audience realize that the sculpture from earlier has moved. Again, I don't think I need to say why this is scary, but I'm going to. Inanimate objects should not move on their own, and thus it means that someone did move it or it did move on its own. Moments later, we hear thunder, and despite Wyatt being deep underground, the lights go out. I mean, we shouldn't even have heard the thunder in the first place. And then we see the sculpture again, and again it moves. This is also the first time I noticed that you can actually hear a storm in the background and what sounds like howling wind. Also, as the sculpture disappears again, we get more creepy ambient music. Wyatt finds a store with plant life overgrowing it, and a bunch of viewers pointed out to me that the giant, or something, is hiding behind one of the trees in this room. I didn't really believe it and couldn't see it at first, but upon further inspection, there is something behind that tree, and when I realized it, I got fucking goosebumps. You barely notice it, but it is there. And almost in a cartoonish way, it leans behind the tree slowly. Whether it was just a lighting mishap or something, it still scared me. What's that noise? Wyatt thinks to himself as he's looking into the store, and this also raises the hairs on the viewer's neck. Is something moving around in the mall? Wyatt goes to explore, and then, boom, tension payoff. There are a bunch of reasons that this scare is effective, which I've already talked about throughout, but I'm going to elaborate here, because the series has built to this point. We've had the giant hinted at from the very beginning, from part 1. We've seen it move, and Wyatt has been constantly darting his camera around, only for nothing to appear. So when this finally does, when we finally hear those wheels and the camera turn around, there is an immense sense of dread. Then, of course, he begins to try to walk away and it starts to follow him. This, of course, plays with our expectations as well as Wyatt's. We've all seen horror-related media where there is a creature that only moves if you aren't looking at it. And Wyatt and us as the audience seem to think that maybe this is one of those creatures, that there's a pattern there. It won't move unless you're looking at it, so you're safe if you're looking at it. But then, almost immediately, this rule is broken as he is looking directly at it and it begins to roll at him at a frightening speed, even as he's trying to also tell it that he's leaving. This is terrifying for 2 reasons. It implies both intent and understanding. It implies understanding because it plays with Wyatt's expectations. Sure, there's a possibility that it only moves when he isn't looking at it because it can't. Maybe it's becoming more alive or more powerful the longer Wyatt's in the mall. Or maybe it is playing with him, toying with his expectations. This would imply some type of understanding on the part of the creature. You have to understand what you're doing to play with someone. And it implies intent because, well, we all know that it seems to want to get Wyatt or make him leave. We don't know which it wants, we just know that it is chasing him. With a killer like Michael Myers, you have intent and understanding as well. His intent is to kill you. The understanding is that he is evil, insane, and smart to some degree. With the giant, we have that extra layer of terror because we understand it in some way. We know it has a goal, but we don't know what either of these levels of understanding or intent are. We don't know how smart it is, and we don't know truly what it wants besides getting you. And that's that fear of the unknown coming back. It gets you every time. This is also part of that idea of escalation that I was talking about earlier. We think it can only move when we're looking at it, but it can move when you're looking at it. Then, not long after, it breaks through some wall and glass paneling after Wyatt barely escapes it. Another escalation. Really quick, the reason I keep talking about escalation is because escalation is important in horror because it keeps things scary. If our hero begins to outmaneuver our monster or the world of horror, it seems less of a threat to them and us as the audience. To keep things scary, things have to escalate. Monsters have to become more dangerous. Things have to become more paranormal and fucked up. It's just one of the rules. If suddenly our hero is blasting them with machine guns and killing everything and just escapes, it stops being scary and it's more triumphant. Anyway, Wyatt manages to sneak out of the back rooms and over into the mall's offices, in which a smooth but creepy ambient track plays as he pores over information that is important to him escaping, but also important to figuring out the hidden lore of the oldest view, which you can find out more about in my other video. Wyatt is relatively safe here in these offices, so for a moment at least we're given a reprieve from the fear of the rolling giant in the mall. Though like earlier with the giant hiding behind the tree, we can actually see the red flags that stick out of the back of the giant's cart here. Whether this means the giant is there just chilling or not, we don't know. Wyatt does seem to notice them, but not much else, so I assume that it means it could be up in the air. It's either just sitting there and chilling and Wyatt didn't notice it, or it's not there and those flags are just there. Wyatt sees a path to the exit and he goes for it. As Wyatt approaches the door, he hears people talking, what sounds like funeral music, and sees this ominous poster. This is all unsettling because, well, it's different than what we've come to expect so far. There has been thunder, there has been music, the lights coming on and off. This just seems like another new change to the mall, and soon enough we see that it is. As Wyatt walks back out, the visuals now match the off-putting sounds. The mall is in ruins, another escalation of the situation that we as the audience and Wyatt are in. I'm going to run through the end here pretty quickly. Wyatt explores the mall again one last time with this new soundscape until he is roll scared by the giant. Seeing the rest of the giants during a strike of lightning, which should not happen again because he is deep underground. The giant again changes tactics, suddenly having the power to make the escalators move, and flashes that image of death at Wyatt before charging him, establishing another power that thing can apparently crack walls. The sound at this point is just a bouquet of noise. You have the horns, you have the loud echoing roll of the giant, you have the storm and the thunder in the background. It's overwhelming. You have Wyatt running around and his breathing. It's all coming together to give you this feeling of panic that really matches what he is feeling in that moment. Wyatt, of course, tries to get away, scrambling across the edge, but he doesn't and falls to his death. Then we cut to Wyatt dead on the surface amongst the forest, black and white like Julian Reverchon at the beginning of part 1, with the giant's head across from him as well, black and white. This is all done in a third-person perspective, signaling Wyatt's death. Now I'm going to bring it all together, we're going to bring it on home. The rules of horror in the oldest view comes in many forms throughout the miniseries. One of the most obvious, as I've already stated many times, is the horror of the mundane and the normal versus the abnormal. A mall is normal, mundane, but put it a mile underground with a deep scary staircase and a scary room before it, and this incredibly unsettling sculpture. This would be unsettling to anyone from the normal world. Sound is also incredibly important in this series. Kane Pixels and his team have done a fantastic job with the sound design, both in general with sound effects and music. It really does sound like an open space. Wyatt's voice echoes, and it seems just right for the emptiness of the mall or the closeness cave-like structure of the stairs, and the musical stings that lead up to certain moments hit exactly as they're meant to, giving us a false sense of security, introducing us to the normal, then slowly unsettling us until those scares finally pay off. All of this culminates in a slow build-up from part 1 to part 2 to part 3 as we move through each, as the sound and visuals and the actions and narrative of our protagonists begin to settle in on us and unsettle us until we finally meet our monster for that big payoff scare in the middle of part 3. The monster or monsters within the series, the giant and the mall itself, are excellent for a number of reasons. The giant is a real-life sculpture by artist Kevin Auberjohn. It already had a rather uncanny feel to it before it was used in this series in the real-life abandoned Valley View Center Mall. And literally bringing it to life and making it this chaser-type monster doubles that uncanniness for us. It's scary because we don't understand it, but it seems to have some type of intelligence and goal, aka understanding or intent. And all of this is even scarier for people who actually went to that mall, who actually saw that sculpture. The monster also breaks its own rules, seemingly growing stronger or playing with Wyatt. We don't know which, and that's even scarier. Is it trying to help him? Is it messing with him on purpose? We don't know, and that is scary. And this goes back to that idea of escalation I also talked about. If Wyatt could just run upstairs and get away from the giant forever or hide in a room, it wouldn't be scary. But instead, it eventually goes up the escalator, and it breaks through a wall and glass paneling. It apparently even hides like a little cartoon guy behind a tree at one point. That scary little fuck. The change in perspective between parts 1 and 2, and even the end in part 3, helps add to horror through dramatic irony. We're giving information at the beginning that we know is important. We don't understand why, but we do know it's important. We as the audience are left to slowly piece this together as we move from this third-person perspective to first, through Wyatt's camera lens, which leaves us a sense of unease for what the information shown to us means for our protagonist. Why is this related to Wyatt? Speaking of Wyatt, the actor who played Wyatt did an excellent job. He feels real, from the cheerful bubby vlogger to the scared guy running around the mall, darting the camera around. All of his voice lines feel real and are delivered well.
You fucking kidding me? You gotta fucking kidding me.
Speaking of the mall, it seems to have a life of its own, and is in a way capturing one of my favorite tropes of horror, which is living buildings or haunted places. It definitely handles it in a different way, taking on a more natural progression of the mall falling into ruin and being overtaken by nature, but it's still a really cool and interesting way to approach that. A lot of this really does draw down to the fear of the unknown, one of the most basic rules of horror. Why is the mall there? Why is the giant after Wyatt? Why do we see all the other giants in a flash towards the end? Why the dead horses? Why the third-person perspective to the first-person perspective? Of course, this mystery is also part of that fear and part of what grabs us as an audience. The videos wouldn't be as good if it didn't have all of these elements together, and that's why it's so effective. It leaves us asking why. We are scared because we don't know why. It's left us wondering what it all means, and scared because we don't understand it, and now someone is left dead and we still don't have any answers. To wrap it all up, this series on a fundamental level is just really well designed. It's big things that seem little that add up, like the sound design, the camera work, not to mention the acting of the guy playing Wyatt, the sounds of the giant in the mall, the ambient music. It all comes together to create an extremely well-paced package of build-up that leads to a few core scares, without once resorting to using gore or a jump scare or overly loud noises that come out of nowhere and in a way that makes your heart race. Not that there's anything wrong with any of that, especially when it's well done, but I always respect a piece of horror media that can create such dread and fear without using any of them. I didn't do much lore theorization in this video because I already did that in the previous video, which you can go watch here. I think one thing I'd say is that I have leaned more towards maybe the giant doesn't want to hurt Wyatt, especially because it starts to leave after he gets on that first escalator, but I still don't know, we'll have to see. Maybe it was just going around to flank him. Also, this isn't the last time I'm going to be talking about KanePixel's work. Since everyone has seemed to enjoy that first analysis, and I'm hoping they enjoy this one, I'm going to do a third video or videos on his entire Backroom series, which I am currently watching as I am making this video. Hopefully that'll be out before the end of the year, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm GhostsOnHoliday, and remember that bad days are just days that are bad. Now that we've been through both of my original videos, it's time to explore the new stuff that's come out afterwards. The biggest thing, obviously, is Life of a Giant, another bit made by Kane Pixels. This shows a slideshow of different images and videos that were taken when the original Reverchon Giant still existed in Dallas, as well as images of the mall, which then transitions into the period of the mall's collapse. This is all set to a cover of the song Please 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 Let Me Get What I Want by the Smiths. After going through all of these relatively normal history-based images of the giant, it ends with an incredibly ominous black and white image, or video really, of a stone monument with two staircases flanking it as a looping wind track plays. It's foggy, it's creepy, and this image is pretty obviously meant to mimic the placement of the two escalators and this structure here in the Valley View Center Mall, especially the version that we saw in KanePixel's The Oldest View. This is really cool, but also incredibly creepy, which is just a great way to describe all of KanePixel's work. There are images that are similar to this one, but none of them are one-to-one, which has led me to believe that this is probably an original image created by Kane, possibly in Blender or just a heavily photoshopped image. Of course, I believe this is connected to what we saw and is possibly showing that whatever the mall and the giant are, older than we know, hence the oldest view. And while I do personally think that Kane meant for the oldest view to be more about subtext and the philosophical implications of what's going on, I think it still has a straightforward haunting story in it and is related to the paranormal in that storytelling.
There is still a more material story running alongside here, like Wyatt. Like all the things that happened with Wyatt and whatnot, that is still a beyond just theme. Those are actual characters and stakes and everything. So that does exist, but it's not the point, I guess. Pretty early.
And even with all that subtext and the messages he's trying to get across, I still do think he probably has a story planned out for all of this and a meaning within the world that he's crafted for what these things are, where they come from. I think a lot of people tend to do that when they have something mysterious like this. They at least have an idea in their own head of like, okay, this is an ancient evil god, or like a manifestation of nostalgia in the modern era that has been given corporeal form or whatever. One of the cooler theories that I definitely can't take credit for is from Reddit, actually. Someone mentioned that it could possibly be a Ghostbusters Gozer type situation. To make it clear, in the lore of Ghostbusters, especially the original movie, the followers of an ancient god of destruction known as Gozer built parts of a building to look like a temple of Gozer, which Gozer could then use to come into our world. I don't think it's exactly one-to-one, because I don't think the mall itself was built by people, at least that version that he saw underground. Yes, the original mall was built by people. More that the mall that was seen in the oldest view was similar enough to whatever this ancient, mysterious structure is, and that is why it manifested. I don't think this theory holds water completely, but I do think the general idea is sound, that the mall and this structure look very similar, and that means that whatever the giant and the mall are similar manifestations of whatever this strange ruin and these stairs is. Another person also mentioned that the center stone was similar to one at Coral Castle, a place built in Florida by a man who apparently built the entire castle himself. He stated that he knew how the pyramids were built and used magnetism to make the stones like air, or the stones as light as air. Of course, there are some crazy paranormal implications to all of this, and the man in question, Edward Leeds Scullin, died before he could share these apparent secrets of magnetism with the world. This is all, of course, just extra things that I wanted to share, and I think has some pretty interesting and greater implications for the world of the oldest view, which Kane pretty implicitly says is important that it is paralleled with our current existing world.
It's very important that the oldest view is derivative and running parallel to the world that we live in right now, right here, in the oldest view. And I feel like this is, I care about this very much with all of my work to an extent.
Pixels also did release some behind-the-scenes footage showing the making of the oldest view, which I really appreciate for a number of reasons. The biggest is that it breaks down the creative process as this thing that isn't pure and direct, but dirty and very fluid. When I was younger, for some reason, I thought that creative people had everything planned out from the beginning. I don't know why I did, but I just did. And it was kind of a sin to me not to have every little detail finished in my own head. This, of course, is incredibly silly, because the reality is that creativity is like any other part of being human. It's fluid and it changes as time goes on. And this belief stifled me in a lot of my creative works because I never felt that they were finished enough, when the reality is just working on them was how they got finished. You may start with a bare bones idea or have a fleshed out outline. Even then, for most things creative, things change along the way. You have to test to see what works. Some things you had set in your heart from the beginning will start to change as you go through the process of making it. And sometimes projects get scrapped altogether or become something entirely different from what they were by the time they finished. Creativity is like a patchwork quilt, slowly piecing together different pieces until it's finished. You can even change along the way yourself as a person, and this can heavily affect how your work is made. So, I said all that because I really liked seeing these pieces of work from the oldest view in their more raw form. It just shows Kane experimenting with his creative process to see what works, what's interesting or scary, and we don't see enough of that from people, I feel like. Personally, I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful to show that creativity isn't this one thing. It's not perfect. It's slowly working to find what works and then just going, yes, I like this, and hoping that other people like it as well. So that is everything we have on the oldest view right now. Kane has said that he has more ideas for the future of the series, but is currently working on the Backrooms movie, and I also look forward to that. So it'll probably be a while before we get anything else oldest view or anything else YouTube Backrooms. Anyway, thanks for everything, everyone. I really appreciate it. As I've said before in another video or two, 2023 has been my best year on YouTube so far, and I look forward to 2024. Anyway, I'm GhostsOnHoliday, and remember, a cacophony of unease.
I feel like we need to be quiet in here.
Maybe we do.
Jacob, a fake
No,
Skylar.
he's stabbing me! I can't run!